Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Danielle Norwood Show on our Alpha Media group of radio stations, which is 580 WIBW AM, FM News 1049, Big Country 94.5, and Country 1069. Thank you for joining us today. We are changing up our show to join forces with our parent company, Alpha Media, and talking about race in America through their national campaign called United for Justice, a day of discussion. If you've been listening to the program previously, you've heard a variety of speakers talk about a number of issues relating to race on a national level. But for the remaining time, we are going to break down what's going on in our communities of color right here in Topeka and Northeast Kansas. Joining me for the second hour, we have Pastor Johnathan Sublet, who is lead campus pastor for the High Crest Campus Fellowship Bible Church and the founder and chairman of the board for St. Topeka. S.J. Hazim, who's founder of Project Forward Top City, and Bob Ross, who is senior vice president of marketing and communication for the Greater Topeka Partnership. Thank you all for being on today.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, thank you for having us.
And I've already gotten excited about the conversation. We met previously with the mayor and chief of police and Grant English from Western Hills, as well as T.B. Hicks from Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. And that went so well. And now I'm excited to speak with you all because there's some pretty deep things going on. And I would love your perspective on everything. So feel free. This is a roundtable. It's going to be very informal, what we're talking about today. But I want to start out by giving a quote that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said. He said that after the death of George Floyd, that he felt like he was caught between hope and history. Hope that America would live up to the words in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. But too often in America, Black Americans and other people of color have not been treated equally, and it's gone on for far too long. What is your reaction to that statement? And anybody can start.
When I hear that, that's not surprising. There's that for me. It kind of goes into everybody's going to kind of get a preview of where I'm going for Sunday. This actually, Toni Morrison said this. She said, "Memory allows us to ponder the actual while imagining the possible." But Dante Stewart recently came out and said that memory often allows us to imagine the possible at the expense of pondering the actual. And so with the way Toni Morrison said it and the way Kareem Abdul was saying is the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to be able to imagine what's possible while not while still being able to be in the moment. But what actually happens is we begin to see what's possible, and it causes us to be so distracted that we can't see what's actually happening and be present in the moment that we find ourselves in. Our country was founded with these things that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said. And even before that, if we like, just my belief of being a Christian, we're all made in the image of God. And so we're supposed to treat every image bearer in that way. But life has never operated like it was supposed to in the garden. Our country, our country, a lot of people keep saying reconciliation. And that's a bad term because the reason we say we get reconciled to God is because things were once right in the garden and then fell apart. Mm-hmm. Our country has never gotten raised right. We've never gotten raised right. And so we can't reconcile. We have to conciliate before we can ever reconciliate. And so that's what when I hear that quote, I understand what he's saying is like we cannot imagine the possibility of what was written in those documents at the neglect of recognizing where we're at and where we have been as a country.
That's good. Bob, SJ?
Well, I'll say we're definitely in some times right now. And a lot of times when somebody's in a struggle, it's hard to recognize other people's struggle. I see a lot of that going on because, being Black, there's different things that come with that. And I know a lot of times people are getting caught up in saying we're blaming all white people. We're doing this, we're doing that, and everything else. But if two people are hiking and they're hiking up a mountain and one person might have a 50-pound pack on, that person who doesn't have that pack on, they're still feeling the pain of that struggle they're going through. And in the midst of somebody being immersed in their struggle, it's hard to even want to think about somebody else's struggle. So I think there's a lot of that we're facing right now because everybody is going through different things. And some people, if you're not Black, you don't know what that feels like on some different things. So I would say it's one of those things to where we actually have to be like, everybody's going through some different things, and we need to actually recognize some other struggles besides our own. And I think it's hard for us to do that just as a human being.
That's so good. Bob?
Yeah, I think it's been a very powerful couple weeks, even for myself. I mean, it's been interesting, even the conversations I've had with, my family and friends, and obviously, being a part of the community. It's definitely, I think, a big teachable moment for a lot of people right now, because there's a lot of well-intentioned people that had their heads buried in the sand. And I think that with what happened with George Floyd, it viscerally put something in front of them they couldn't deny, but then they had to start to have an introspective time to kind of start to figure out, what does this mean? What does this mean for our country? Especially when we're raised to think of all the glories of the United States and everything that we're told about. And then this beats you over the head again with something that has been broken and unhealed for so long. And there's a lot of people that are in denial and don't want to deal with it. And honestly, still want to kind of push this away and let's just get back to normal. But what does feel different about this moment is that it really, especially, and I think especially in the white community, it's waking up, I think, a lot of people to the fact that it's really time we deal with this. If you're, a white person in America, we built this system which is injuring and hurting people generationally, and it's time for us to stand up and be a part of the solution. And I'm still telling you, like, it's been very hard for me. I mean, I've had some very difficult conversations with some family members, and it's brought up some really painful things that it's amazing the level of denial and honestly flat out racism that I didn't even know was there, but just kind of buried under the surface. So it is. I think we're all just kind of learning as we go right now.
And to your point, I've had some conversations with people that I've known for a while, and it just shocked me because I thought we were all on the same page. And then something like this happens, and you're like, okay, wait a second. And then you start re-examining previous conversations, and it puts a different light on everything that you thought that you knew about a person. And certain phrases like, I'm not racist, but ... fill in the blank. And I think a lot of people feel in their heart of hearts that they're not racist. But if you have certain mentalities that point towards that, it might make you feel good to feel like you've got 3 Black friends, so you're obviously not racist, but you've got some inner work to do about just how you think about people and the way that you react to things. So there have been some very hard conversations that I've had with people, and it's been kind of dark for me. There was one day last week, I think that I'd watched about 48 hours of the coverage of all the rioting and looting that had gone on. And it just took me to a really dark place because I'm like, you know what? We have enough to deal with in our lives, and a lot of us are already exhausted. And this was just one more thing to add to that. So I'm going to mention several words, and I want to get each of your first reactions to the words, because some of the words people will not be familiar with, but if you're in a community of color, you've probably heard the word and bandied it about several times. So Black Lives Matter. Talk to me about your first reaction when you hear the term Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And Jonathan, I'm going to start with you because you're already smiling. I know you got a thought.
Well, here's the deal. So most of us, like I went to college. I grew up in the hood, single parent. She had 3 kids. I was youngest 3 kids. I graduated high school. I got to go to college. Nobody else did. And I grew up watching the Cosby Show. And the first, other than before my 6th grade teacher took me out to his house and ate dinner at his house around his dinner table, the only time I saw a family eat dinner together was on the Cosby Show. So that became my definition of being rich. And so I flew to college on a one-way ticket, and somebody from the college picked me up, and I graduated with a chemical engineering degree, 4 years. I got out, right? Before I went back in to the hood. And so you start getting groomed at an early age, not just how to act when the police pull you over, not just how to act when you go into the store, always get a receipt. I still keep receipts on me in case I ever get accused of something. But you also get groomed on how to make your way up the corporate ladder.
Yes.
So like how you see my hair now, when I was still in corporate America, I never would have worn my hair like this. I never would have grew this much out. I knew I couldn't talk about certain things. I couldn't make certain statements. I had to stay with certain guidelines. I had to be in certain activities and different things of that nature. I had to watch every single little thing because I knew that any little thing could derail my opportunity, and I owed it to everyone else who sacrificed for me to stay out. And so when it came time for things like Black Lives Matter, look at here, when the shootings happened in 2016, I went through the Citizens Police Academy in the city where I lived at. I joined the Blue Lives Matter group, and even though I spoke about the injustices and stuff like that, I wouldn't say Black Lives Matter because I knew, one, when you're in those spaces, you know that you can never talk about race. And if you do talk about race, you have to talk about it so gently as to not arouse the guilt and the complicity of those around you who are participating in the system. You have to make sure to coddle and hold their fragility. That becomes your job as their Black friend. And so in that case, when it was just a couple of days ago, for the first time that I said Black Lives Matter in anything public, because like even now I'm at a majority white church, and my campus is mixed. I'm in a neighborhood that's a third, but the other campus is way larger than our campus. And so I know the space that I exist in, and I was like, man, is this going to ruin and burn bridges that I'm trying to build and trying to do this work? And you get to a point, and we're at a point in history where you say, I've been the first and the only in so many situations, and that starts losing its value.
Yeah.
Because you see you're burning yourself emotionally trying to play this game, and you're giving the best of yourself, and you don't know if it's really making any impact. And your people are still suffering, and you're not moving the dial for why you made the transition in the first place. And so this whole Black Lives Matter, people say, well, I can't get on board because the organization, I don't agree totally with the organization. You know what? There's some things because of my Christian beliefs that I don't support about the organization, but I understand their intent. And in the same way, a lot of my brothers and sisters in the evangelical church said they voted a certain way in this last election, even though they didn't agree with everything that the person they voted for does. And so in the evangelical church in America, we have a way of playing this game. And that's what people are fed up with, is that game that we play and switch back and forth between. And so it's time to call a spade a spade.
And we will be getting to that in the next few minutes. So thank you for just kind of teeing that up. SJ and Bob, I want you to react to that.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. I'll say this. I was born in the FOI Islam. And when I say that, a lot of people might not know what that is, but that's Fruits of Islam. I was being raised to be prejudiced. It's just what it was. So I know what that's about. My dad, his journey was just like Malcolm X's. He went on Hajj. That's the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. He saw all these different colors, praising Allah. And it broke his heart that he was raising us that way. So he came back, switched over to Orthodox Islam, moved us from Kansas City, Missouri to Topeka. At that time, I got an uncle who's a hitman. He ended up, killing my auntie. That was another reason we moved. My family is gang related in Kansas City, Missouri as well. So when we got here to Topeka, we moved around a lot. But for high school, they sent us all to the same high school, which was Topeka West. At that time, I graduated in 92. The amount of blacks we had at that school was less than 1%. So I'm thinking maybe 19 black people out of close to maybe 800. So my dad did all that on purpose. He did that because he wanted to undo what he started to do. So I'm very comfortable being wherever I need to be at, multicultural. So Black Lives Matter. Now I'm going to get on that. When things first started and Black Lives Matter was doing things in the past, I didn't really get heavily involved in anything because I'm one of those people as far as it came with a stigma. It came with different things. If you say different things, there's different results that come back. But we are in a situation now where I do not have the luxury to sit back and not be involved as a black man. So regardless how somebody feels about the organization and everything they might not agree with, Black Lives Matter. Because if you can say Blue Lives Matter and you can say All Lives Matter, that means you must be caught up on that black, because that's the only thing that changes. So yes, but when I hear Black Lives Matter, the first thing that comes to my mind is basically right now they've been the big power behind this movement, and people have gravitated around it. All 50 states are participating. We got over 18 countries. Never seen nothing like it in my life. But right now, we do need people to respect Black lives, because we have been dying at the hands of police for years and all kind of other things that I could get into. But that's where I'll stop it.
Okay, Bob, you're up.
Yeah. It's funny because I've learned, especially this week, just how incendiary those words can be for some people. And, I was really encouraged by the fact that we had a Black Lives Matter mural that appeared in, North Topeka out in Noto. And it was a really meaningful expression of solidarity, I thought, for the community. And when I shared it, I helped moderate a large Facebook group in Topeka with about 15,000 people on it. And I knew that those words can also be a little triggery. And so I remember I have two other people that moderate that group. And so I just texted them. I'm saying, okay, just get ready. I'm going to put this out here. I'm going to post it. Just be ready for trolls. It's going to happen. It's going to happen fast. And within a second of me pressing send, All Lives Matter. And it's someone I knew too. And I also knew her heart. And I'm like, she doesn't get it. And I think that I definitely think there are a couple groups out there. There are some people that are going to use All Lives Matter as a stick in the eye. And then there are some that I think are just they're just not there yet. And honestly, people started piling up on her real fast. And I was like, hold on, everyone slow down. Because I also knew her, and she's an older, woman and probably in her 70s. And I'm like, okay, hey, let's try to keep this positive and constructive. Let's have a dialogue. And, and actually one of the best things that I read was actually, probably it was even a meme or someone shared, but it was the parable of the sheep. And I think it was one of the best ways I can communicate that message to that demographic. And it's, the evangelical community, good-hearted people, but they'll still say All Lives Matter just as much. And I could tell her, it's like, it's not, no one's just saying your life doesn't matter. Everyone doesn't matter. It's right now, when Jesus left the 99, it wasn't because he only loved the one. It's because the one was in danger. The one needed him. And I think that I'm learning that's the message we have. It's this teachable moment. It's this dialogue, and it's breaking through this hardness in the heart, because those words, I think, stirs things up in people, but maybe honestly, it's also they stir a conviction that maybe people don't want to deal with, and they don't want to hear it because it's easier to hide away from the things that convict you than it is to face them face to face.
Okay, I'm going to bring up two
Jonathan?
more terms. The terms Becky or Karen or even Rachel. When you hear those terms, okay, and SJ, you're starting because you cracked up because you knew where I was going. Barbecue Becky, come on and bring it.
Okay, so when I hear Becky, I just found out what Karen meant yesterday, right? But Becky,
Okay.
I've been hearing that for a while. So to me,
And explain that to people who have no idea what I just said.
Well, there's some names that are associated with some behaviors. I'll say. I mean, basically, to me, when I hear Becky, it's pretty much like one of the most suburbanist white people that you probably have ever seen, who has never seen a black person up close. If she sees a couple of black people together, she's picking up the phone, talking about, hey, there's something going on here. I feel I'm in danger. There's too many black people in front of me right now. I don't know what's going on, but so when I hear Becky, that's what I think about. I think about somebody who is just pretty much oblivious to just about anything that's got to do with color or people. And when she sees a black person, she gets scared because people fear the unknown. They only see us a lot of times. The only interaction, well, there is no interaction, but the only time they see us is in the media in shackles and chains. So if they see somebody and they're not in shackles and chains, it's almost like seeing a lion outside of the jungle or, outside of the zoo. So that's what I think of when I think of Becky.
Anybody else want to speak to it? Because recently there was a person in New York who didn't have her dog on a leash, and she called the police to say that this black man who told her maybe you would want to put your dog on a leash because it's the rule. She's like, this black man is threatening me. I mean, and the man wasn't threatening her at all, but she knew that she could get the police attention if she actually said a black man was threatening her. And so she ended up losing her job as a result of it. And she got a lot of backlash on social media. And she ended up apologizing later, saying that it was a teachable moment for her. But, I'm going to play devil's advocate and say you should have known that from the very beginning. You should have had some home training to say that's not something that we do in general. And I don't care if race is involved or not. You just don't go and lie and say that somebody's threatening you when they're not threatening you just because you want to bring the police into a situation that actually you were the one that instigated. But that's my own opinion on that. Please feel free to add to my thoughts.
One, I think it was ironic that both the African-American male and the Caucasian woman had the same last names.
Yes, Cooper. I'll put it out.
Yeah. And so here's the deal. Trevor Noah said the other night, he said one of the things that made it so hard, he's from South Africa. If you don't know, he's from South Africa, apartheid, different things of that nature. And so he said, but the thing that made it so hard for blacks in America is when we were put on those ships, we lost who we were. We have no ties to our heritage. Like my wife is white. She can tell you what European country her heritage comes from. I can't really tell you beyond my grandparents anything. And so when you see that, there was no Coopers in West Africa. Like that's not a West African last name. There was no Coopers. And so
or Norwood either.
Yeah, and so or Sublet, which is a French name. And so when you look at that and that what was lost in that trip over. And then, but what I see is that the burden, even in such cases like this, the burden of educating has always laid on the shoulders of African Americans in moving this forward. Even in the church, a lot of times when we want to do reconciliation, we ask African Americans to move into majority churches. And then it's also about how we shaped. It's something that y'all guys said earlier, like the reason we haven't talked about these things is because before we used to say, hey, Eastern cultures are more shame-based and shaped cultures. But we have a more shame-based and shaped culture than we would like to believe here in America. And that's what makes these conversations so hard, is because one, we have to do a better job of disarming shame. And Brene Brown talks about, like, we use these shame shields at times where either you move against, where you try to discredit the other person when you feel shame, or you move away, you distance yourself. And so you have these different ways that you respond to shame. And the thing is shame says that I'm bad, where guilt says I've done something bad. And so we have to get to the point of saying, like, hey, what's my role in this? But that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. And so that feeds into, like, it's kind of bad when we start calling everybody Becky's or Karen's, because what that does is that puts them in a shame position, and it's going to be hard to move. And there was just a quick story. There was a mom who asked Brene Brown, and she talks about this in one of her books. Hey, when is it okay to stop telling my kid that he lied and called him a liar? She said, when there's no hope for him changing. Ooh. And here's the deal: when we stop believing that our brothers and sisters can move and be transformed, then we've lost. No matter what we gain in rights or whatever else, we've lost, because at that point, we have stopped seeing them in the Imago Dei also. We have decreased their value also. And so we're just as guilty. And so we have to figure out a way forward where we stop being this counsel shame culture, and we have to become a redemption culture. That doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable. And that doesn't mean that people doesn't have to pay retribution, because that's a part of biblical reconciliation and repentance. But it means we have to give people a way back. And that's what's missing in a lot of different conversations right now. There's no way back.
Bob, you want to say something?
Oh, no, honestly, I think that's really powerful. And I do think that it speaks a lot to what we're trying to do right now, even in Topeka, is to just start this dialogue. I mean, a lot of times, and I do believe a lot of racial bias is based on ignorance, and honestly, the fact that people just live in these bubbles and never get to know anyone different than them, never take the time to have a conversation with someone from a different background. And so then it's easy to believe whatever stereotype you watch on television, because you never are around anyone to counter that bias. And I love what Johnathan said, that, we do have to, believe in the hearts of people, and, believe that ultimately everyone's capable of redemption and change. So I will say, touch on what SJ said. We had an experience even in Houston where we lived in a very affluent suburb, and neighborhood Facebook pages can be the devil at times. And there was a woman who immediately alerted the neighborhood Facebook group that she felt like two gangs of kids were descending on the school in the middle of the neighborhood. They just happened to be two groups of black kids that were descending onto the playground. And she's like, they showed up, they turned on loud music. I think they were getting ready for a rumble. And then they started playing basketball. And then two of them started fighting. And so she called the cops. And so she's literally the neighborhood groups started to freak out. They were probably there to play basketball. And then maybe two kids started fighting. And we're just watching this go down. And I mean, we're in Houston, Texas. We're in Katy, Texas, a suburb. And I'm like, what's going on? But you're right. I think that's, there is a lot of people that if they see any group of black people show up in mass in a place where they don't expect them to be, it's a rumble. And I'm like, I don't think people call it a rumble, but yeah. So that stuff is, and that was literally a year and a half ago.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Here's the deal. I moved up from south of here. I lived in Freeport, Bob. I don't know if you know Lake Jackson on the other side of Pearland, down 288, right at the water.
Yep.
Before I moved up to Kansas, and I took my concealed carry class, and in the whole class throughout the time, it was a police leading it, and he kept referring to a thug. If a thug comes up on you, this and that, and every time he would describe a thug, he described somebody who looked like me, and I was the only African American guy in the class.
Oh my goodness!
And it was during the last session that I said, "Hey," and I'm in here like, I probably couldn't do that here. As a pastor, I hosted this class for the men in my church, and we were like, because we had some issues that happened because of what we were doing ministry at, and I'm in here with other men from the church, and they're just hearing like this description, and it's just rolling past them. None of them are getting it. And the last session, I said, "Hey, have you noticed that every time you describe the thug, you describe somebody who looked like me?" And I said, it was after the Enron thing happened. I said, Enron, the guys who run Enron just stole all these people's retirement. I bet you if you would ask one of those people who lost their entire retirement to these thieves what a thug looks like, they might describe it as a guy in a suit with a tie on. But why is it like I've never heard a thug described like that? And I always hear a thug described like me, a guy who has a master's degree, who has no criminal record, who I was like, I adopted my kids. So I didn't have any kids. I've had my kids now for 3 years, foster to adopt. So I was well in my late 30s before I had kids. So all the stereotypes are wrong, but yet I'm a thug.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's no matter what I do, I'm going to carry these stereotypes. And you know what? It's not going to be me that breaks them down. It's going to be my white brothers and sisters that have to speak up and say, enough of this.
Yes.
I will say
Absolutely.
I had a conversation with a family member, and George Floyd got brought up, and it was amazing how quickly it immediately, and I'm just going to be completely real, it descended rapidly into that person challenging me, saying, "Well, you realize we have to kind of wonder what he was doing beforehand that made that happen." And I had to stop him. I'm like, "Hold on, time out. What do you mean?" And literally he's like, "Well, those people do commit a lot of crime." And I'm like, "Hold on, stop. Do you realize, especially," and Danielle knows this, but I come from a lot of white criminals in my family. A lot. There's a lot of white trash. And there's a lot of people that have been in and out of prison. And actually, as I told this family member, I'm like, you realize probably 80% of our family has been in jail. Some for meth, some for making meth, some for like beating up a cop. And yet, this is ultimately, I think, the ultimate privilege of being white, is that 80% of your own family can be criminals, but you don't tar the entire race with criminality. You look at those people are criminals and ignoring literally everyone with a rap sheet in your own family is like, well, and yet that blind spot, I had that entire conversation, it lasted for like 45 minutes. That blind spot didn't budge. And I don't understand where it's at, but you're absolutely right. People have been trained to have a mental picture that this is what a criminal looks like, even if they're surrounding with their own family that doesn't match it. So,
and Johnathan, you and I talked about this the last time that we talked about the fact that people of color get grouped together. White people can be individually doing what they're doing and nobody thinks twice about it. But anytime we do something, anytime I go out and do a station event, I'm automatically bringing the race with me as I go out and about. And I really never thought about it. But again, it's something unconsciously we just do and maneuver in that way and don't even really think about.
We had to. So here's the deal. When you look at it, and I had some of these talks. I've had a lot of these talks over the years. I've been a part of a lot of this and wrote a lot of articles for papers and stuff over this kind of stuff. And generally, the white male thinks, and the white person thinks of themselves as individuals first, group second. Minorities we had to survive, had to think group first, individual second. And so what happened is, like, I would have a lot of my older white friends that say, hey, I grew up in a house with racist parents, but they would have one black person that they like. And they was like, oh, yeah, I like that person. But it was kind of like, I hate cats, but this person's, Danielle's cat is okay.
Exactly. Or
And
I don't like black people, but you're not black, which is the phrase that always got to me. You're not black. It's like all day long.
yeah, and so the deal is that comes with, it was a survival technique for minorities, but it also comes with a lot of pressure. Because when you, SJ, I tell you, when you start making moves, you can tell when you start making moves, that pressure of feeling like the community is on your shoulders, man, there's a lot of pressure come with that. That's why Hammer went bankrupt, right? Because he was trying to lift the whole city of Oakland out when he came out, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know that if everything goes wrong, that they got a spade table waiting for you and a barbecue sandwich, and you can always come home. And it's like, that's one of those deals, right? And there's some pluses and minuses to that. And there's a community element to that. And so if we're going to enjoy the pluses of that, we also have to deal with the minuses of those two different viewpoints.
The bitter and the sweet, as they say. So I want to segue into talking about the city of Topeka. What would you say are some of the needs when it comes to our communities of colors? What are the biggest disparities when it comes to race locally? And SJ, I'm going to have you lead.
Okay. Well, I'll say this. I talked about some things before. I mean, I got into the whole thing about how people are immersed in their own struggle. And then so we go past that, and then we get to pretty much a whole trust deficit that we have. There's people who don't trust the police. There's people who don't trust the city officials. There's people who don't trust black people. There's people who don't trust white people. There's people who don't trust the government. We have all these different trust issues that are happening, which makes people think that some of these things aren't legitimate, some of these things aren't for us, and everything like that. And then what that leads into is the death of dialogue, to where we stop communicating. We don't want police brutality anymore, but we don't want to talk to the cops. And that's one of the things that's a big deal. There's some people who are communicating and trying to change some different things, but I say we're dealing with a whole lot of trust issues. We're dealing with a whole lot of different things where we have problems with different stuff, but a lot of people don't know what resources to go to, who to talk to, or even how to get that conversation going. And I think at this time, people really need a safe place where they can be vulnerable at. And the only thing that's going to solve this, because it's a hard issue, the only thing that's going to solve different things is going, because a lot of us have hardened our hearts to a lot of different stuff. There's people who have hardened their hearts to when they hear BLM, Black Lives Matter. It sends them straight to being ticked off. There's different things. If somebody hears all lives matter, immediately ticks them off and things like that. So I think, like, as far as in Topeka, some different things that are going to happen is we're going to have to start talking to some of the people who are government officials, the different people at the police department, some of the heads of those. I'm glad that, the chief was on earlier and things like that. He's doing a lot of great works, but we're going to have to actually do some things we haven't done before. And doing some things we haven't done before is going to take some courage. So people are going to have to talk to some people they might not have wanted to talk to, or they may have formed different opinions about. And actually, I believe that, there's a thing that we're pushing, which is the social compact with Topeka United. And we want people to sign up to be active, like making a pledge. I'm going to be invested in my community, and actually we're going to hold them accountable for those type of things. So those are some of the things that we're coming up with. But there are a lot of things that are happening on the ground floor that we're trying to get moving, because this is home of Brown versus Board of Education, and we ain't done yet. We about to make some things happen because we want the world to see what Topeka is doing, because we're doing some magnificent things. And anyway, that's where I'm at with it. That's what I think.
Okay, Bob and Johnathan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I can't really speak with any authority on how people of color are feeling, but I can at least say, working so closely with the government and with the leadership in Topeka, I'm encouraged by essentially just how rapidly this city and those that are in positions of authority in this community are embracing this moment and are seeking to listen. I think that even as we're looking to begin to talk about Topeka as a community, we're just declaring that this community is going to be boldly anti-racist. We're not going to be passive about it. We are going to be advocating for, social and racial equity more aggressively now than at any time in my memory. And that really does encourage me, because there are a lot of cities around the country right now which are resisting this. And it wasn't even a thought of resisting it. I think our mayor, our city council, business leaders, the partnership, everyone raced to this moment and said, Topeka's better, and we're going to be better. And if we're not our best, we are going to move together to hear and learn and shape something that the nation could hopefully look to as a model. So it gives me hope for our community because of how our leaders are responding.
Johnathan, what about you?
Okay. There is a difference between peacekeeping and peacemaking. And there's a difference between unity and peacekeeping. And I'm the new guy in town, but what I see that has happened a lot is there's been a lot of peacekeeping and saying that it's unity. And it means that a lot of the hard topics have not been addressed. For instance, there was a police shooting a couple of years ago involving a young man in the community. And there were several people that saw that video that were not minority that said, yes, something was wrong with that, but public, they didn't speak out. And that goes to part of the problem. When you get to Topeka is the home of Brown versus Board. And even then, they said after that ruling, what happened was they integrated the schools, but they started busing the African-American kids. The problem was they started around Kansas, they started shutting down all the African-American schools, and they fired all the African-American teachers because just integrating the schools did not take away the thought that white people were superior to African-Americans. And so they said that our teachers are better. And so they fired the African-American teachers. And what happened was you asked the least resource people in the whole deal, the children, to make the biggest change instead of integrating the teachers. In the city of Topeka, it is not a secret that people don't feel like kids in 501 or Topeka public schools get the same quality education as Washburn Rural and Shawnee Heights and Seaton. But what we've done is we haven't really addressed that as a city and as a church community. When I got ready to move here, I said, I'm going to live in a neighborhood where I'm ministering at, because the shepherd stays with the sheep. And there's a difference between saying God can change your neighborhood and God can change our community. I got to have some scratch in the game. My kids are going to go to 501. I am involved now before they get there, and my kids will get a quality education. But it's seen at how, like, the principals in my school, in the schools around my church and where my neighborhood, keep changing every year. Why is that the case? Why do we keep hiring administrators that live out of town? If you believe in my city, move into my city. If you know what's going to tell me that you believe in the quality of education you're going to give my kids? When you put your own kids in that school. We should give incentives for teachers to live in the area in which they teach at. If they live close to that school, then they put their kids into it. That shows they have some scratch in the game. We have to start putting they have a construction program over at Washburn Rural that builds houses. The Cent is in a partnership with them to get a house built. Why can't we get that built through Highland Park High School? Why don't have the same program? We know like where we're at when we look at the lack of housing, when we look at the lack of the same quality of education, when we look at no minority owned banking, when we look at just all these different things going on in our city, we have to adjust that. We have to be launching entrepreneurs in this area. We know that, hey, when I got here, we know that crime was high in Central Park and in High Crest, right? But we know that there's no tie between race and crime, but there is between long-term unemployment and poverty. Well, those are the two of the most impoverished areas in the city. Why was High Crest not made an opportunity zone when opportunity zones started getting lined out? If we really want to improve that, how we, like I got asked recently in a news report, how are we going to change the narrative of the neighborhood? I said, well, quit coming here doing stories on crime.
Wow.
And how committed are you to my neighborhood, and how are you going to put funds in my neighborhood? I don't care what race you for. I don't care what political party you in. When it comes to November, I want to know three things. How are you going to bring economic development to my neighborhood? How are you going to have quality education seats in my neighborhood? And what are you going to do about crime? Because bodies are steady piling up in my side of the city, and I don't see people on the other side of the city as concerned as I am. And I need to know, I need more than thoughts and wishes.
And prayers.
And prayers. Like, and like, man, Topeka Jump has this group violence intervention thing that's proven in other cities. We need to get that funded. And I ain't telling the city to totally fund it, because I've given my own money to it. Some of my stimulus check went to it. Because you know what? Not too long ago, there was a standoff down the street from my house where I couldn't get home with ice cream for my kids. This is not a nicety. These are real issues that need to be solved, that I need help from all over the city for them. So it's great that you're marching. It's great that you're protesting. But now it's time to sit down at the table and get some real stuff going. And it's going to cost something. And I ain't talking about just money. It's going to cost making some people mad. But we got to get it going.
Some good stuff. We have a couple minutes left before we have to conclude today, and I wish we had hours because we're just scratching the surface on this, but I want to give each of you a moment just to leave us with a parting thought, a takeaway that we can get, that we can connect our listeners to, our viewers to, that inspires them and gives them something to think about after this particular conversation is done.
Okay, I'll say something real quick. Now, voter registration is not enough. We need voter education. I was actually talking to one of the councilwomen today, Karen Hiller, and we talked about this. A lot of times people will get over there ready to vote. They don't even know if they're signed up for the whole vote or not. They really don't know who's on the ballot or what they stand for or anything like that. They might know one person they want to vote for, but have no type of background education on anything else. And I believe that is something that really needs to be pushed, because right now we're seeing what happens when you don't vote. And I'm not saying not voting is not just a Black issue. It's a class issue. It's an economic issue, to where a lot of people, you know, who don't have much or anything like that, they don't really feel that their vote matters for some reason. And we have to change that. And I think that voter education has to go right along with that registration. And we have to, that has to be pushed heavy, especially now. So I just wanted to say that.
Totally agree with you, SJ. Bob, Johnathan, which one would like to go next?
I would say there is progress happening. St. Topeka built the first house in the High Crest neighborhood. That's the first new build that's happened in over 60 years. If you want to be a part of that work, man, go to sttopeka.com, get in with us. There's opportunity, there's green space there. And if we had the right backing, we could really reach our goal of transforming 15% of the housing in that community, of the 2,060 houses that's in that community. And we could see a marked difference in the economics and the education system. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely, Bob. I'll let you end things.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of pressure. You know, I guess I don't have as much to say other than I just encourage our listeners out there that this is a really important time in history, and it's an important time in our country. And I think if we use that as a call to action to really seek out some meaningful conversations with people, really, start to listen, start to learn, start to love a little bit more, start to not make it so. And I guess I'm saying this to our audience that are white like me. Let it be not about you. And I think that's the thing, is that it's hard to not let the world be about you when for generations it's been about you. And I think that I just encourage our listeners to, take a breath and let down your guard and have a conversation with someone who comes from a different background and learn. And I think you'll start to hear the stories of people that will change your heart.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being on today. This has blessed me so much, and I honor you all for your commitment to community. You all do great things. If we had a bio sheet on each one of you, it would go for miles and miles. And so I just want to thank you for sharing your hearts with us. I also want to thank everybody who's either tuned in by radio or watching us on our social media pages, because this has been a very important conversation to have. And I would like to believe that this is the beginning of future conversations. So I'm going to put that out there, that I would love to engage with the three of you once again to talk about more steps that we need to take as a community to get things moving forward. And definitely we want to have more conversations where we can open our ears, our minds, and our hearts. So I am Danielle Norwood for Alpha Media. Make the best of your day, and thank you for tuning in to this day of discussion on our Alpha Media stations.